Matthias Carey drove over from Austin today. Said, he wanted to get out of Austin and spend some time with us. So if you'd share some of your experiences.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks for the hat. So I'm a macroeconomist, and what I do is I work on business cycles, and I use microdata on firm levels to address some questions about business cycles. What business cycles do to the cross-section of firms, how business cycles differential on the impact on, let's say, unproductive towards productive firms. That is kind of the idea. So I look at the interaction between the micro level and the macro level. And so how did I get into this? So if you're doing macroeconomics these days, you will see that we write big models that one way or the other have some sort of heterogeneity built into the models that you write down. You have somehow firms that make some decisions and that give you some little frictions and rigidities. And then you solve these models, you aggregate them up, and typically you work with aggregate data to estimate them. But sometimes there are lots of questions that we cannot address just with the aggregate data. So there are many different models that formulate that heterogeneity on the micro level in different ways. And by using the microdata, you have usually direct measures to directly test different variants of models. So in my case, for example, I wanted to look at if recessions cleanse out very unproductive firms, or if that happens more in a boom when there's competition and a lot of factory relocation going on. So far there have been theoretical models out there, and people have looked at indirect, more aggregate measures. And what I did, I went to the Census RDC in Chicago, and I used some panel data set on manufacturing plants to estimate plant-level productivity. And the manufacturing panel is probably one of the best census data sets there are. It's a very long panel that goes back to 1972, so you have almost 4 decades of years available, and it's an extremely good coverage. That is much better than the coverage of other data sets that are available in other sources. So I could then estimate the productivity and look at the cross-section of firm risk, and see when does the cleansing of unproductive firm happens. Is it driven by somehow very productive firms entering? When do those enter? Is it driven by more productive firms just growing stronger? Is it driven by productive firms taking over resources from unproductive firms and pricing them out of the market? So these are all the questions that I could address with that. And so far, the state of the research, the connotation was that recessions are basically extremely harsh on unproductive firms. You kill those out. And what I saw actually, well, there's also another thing which is going on. In a recession, also competition and factor on goods market is very slack, which is actually dominating this cleansing effect. And what you get is that you get actually more cleansing in a boom when competition is very intense across firms, and unproductive firms are priced out of the market then. So this is something I couldn't have done in any way with aggregate data. And so there was my thesis, and it got me a job, and a nice one. So that's basically what I did. And I see for people that work somewhere with more aggregate models, the way to go is probably there's so many complicated models out there that feature this micro-level heterogeneity. And with the microdata, we can either test those models, or we can refine them, or we can just purely work empirical, document the facts and see how they aggregate up. Because sometimes also very helpful, and that comes a little bit back to the questionnaire idea here. Sometimes it's very helpful to know what's actually behind the aggregate data we're usually just using without questioning them too much. If you know how the sausage is made, then you start getting a little bit more careful, and a little bit you also start improving a little bit how measurement is made. So in my project, one of the measurement issues that came up is I had to use data on the capital stock of firms. That involved some imputation of that, and some other researchers have done that. And when I actually aggregate this up just purely empirically, I found that these microdata that had been somehow imputed. So when you go to the RDC, you will see there will be some information that is just collected in questionnaires, and the other information that you can, very simple accounting rules, start to impute. It turned out that these didn't aggregate at all to what was known for the aggregate data. And then I had to go back to how things were done exactly. And this turned actually into one of the so-called census benefits, improving one of the data sources by improving the imputation technique that was used on those data. So these are the things that happen to you when you actually go and start doing your project. You will see you had something in mind, you had a research question in mind that is very important, but you see changes to your project along the way. Because you enter the lab and you stay there for a couple of years, you'll see new questions popping up, and you see new areas that you won't have to probably to do research to just answer your previous question. So that is good in a way that you can generate several papers out of a given project. It's also good because you get to know the data very in great detail, and that helps you. Let's say there's a fixed cost to getting to know the data and then using that for other projects in the future. And also it helps you justifying a little bit the benefits to the Census Bureau that sometimes also pop up along the way. So this is basically a broad overview of my research. I have a couple of notes about the big steps, how to get access to the data, how to the important things that are in the research proposals, how to do research, what are the useful things to know. So they're written up there. The first stage is the proposal stage. Before you can actually work with the data, you need to get special sworn status. So that means basically you're a trustworthy person and you're allowed to enter the lab in principle. It's different, it's separate from the actual census proposal, but basically the administration will run a background check on you. I want to mention this because it involves some paperwork and it takes time. You can safely allocate 2 or 3 months to account for that. And I'd recommend applying for the special sworn status at the same time you apply for the census proposal. Because the census proposal takes 3 to 4 months to go through. Special sworn status takes a little bit of time to go through. Especially if you're a foreigner, that may take a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra documentation. So keep that in mind. Once you have that special sworn status, you can in principle enter the RDC and do research. And keep in mind that anybody working on a project, so if you're a professor or researcher, you want to do research and you want to have an RA, those RAs also need the special sworn status. And if you have a collaborator and you want to show him results, then that person also needs special sworn status. So these are the couple of cornerstones of the part of the fixed cost you want to keep in mind. Okay, once you have that, you also have to write the census proposal. There's a lot of very useful information on the census website, which will be your friend when you write that proposal. The things that I just want to highlight there is, so first of all, you have to write a very, very brief pre-proposal that goes to the research director here. He pre-screens it a little bit and sees if there are some obvious things that need to be weeded out or some obvious things that need to be changed. And then you actually write the actual proposal, which consists of 2 documents. One's the proposal that states your scientific research project, and there's some guidelines there. And there's a second document, the so-called predominant purpose statement, which I think is probably the more important one, because this is the one that Census needs in order to turn around to other agencies in the administration to justify the use of their data. So Census gets data from the IRS, from the Social Security Administration, from various different resources. So by law, Census, by its mandate, needs to show that this project actually has a benefit to the administration beyond the scientific benefits. So when you go to this website that I wrote above, you'll see a laundry list of the census benefits. You'll typically pick some of them and see how your project as a side product will also benefit the census bureau. Of course, you don't frame it, this is a side benefit. You say this is the benefit. I would recommend so every data set that Census collects has some description, some documentation around it. And there's always an introductory long section. The purpose of this is XYZ. Go to that section and find out what Census actually wanted to do. And usually you can somehow frame this in the context of your research project and say basically, listen, if I do my research project, that exactly serves the purpose why this data collection effort was undertaken. So that's always the easiest and safest way to address those benefits. There will be other benefits too, and your research coordinator will talk with you about those. One word about the duration of projects. When you write the project, you have to ask first for the data sets you want and the length. I'd recommend rather go on the upper end. You can ask for up to 5 years of projects. You want to keep in mind that once you have a research project, you have results, you disclose them, you write them up in the paper, you send the paper somewhere. Usually the paper gets rejected, and you have to send it somewhere else, and so on. So that takes about that itself.
Do you?
All the time. Okay, so for the lucky guys about this, they get maybe along with shorter projects. But so the main reason is that when you get a revision request, you have to go back to the lab and actually redo some of the data. It's good if the project is still running. If it's no longer running, Census will usually reopen it once. But reopening several times, they're a little bit iffy about this. So you want to ideally get the first revisions while the project is still active and you don't have the hassle of asking them. So that's one thing. The second thing is about the data set. There's a little bit an option value too. So you want to ask for data sets which you think might be useful, A, for the exact research project you are taking there, but this whole proposal thing is a huge fixed cost. So ideally, you want to generate several papers of that. So keep in mind, what are the neighboring data sets that could allow me to address a related question or follow-up question, and put this already in the proposal, because then you can just, under the same project, do this other work. You will have no issues with getting those results disclosed because it will still show up in your PPS and in your proposal. So these are the things that to keep in mind. What is the option value of your project? Okay, if you're a graduate student, you can apply too, and that's the way what I did. And typically, the advisor has to be in the project too, kind of as a formal requirement, so that, I mean, there's a little bit of a commitment device here. So you can advise too. I would say if you go on the job market, it probably helps you because it demonstrates that you've been independently pursuing your own stuff. And the earlier you get your hands on the data and to know how the entire thing works, the better. Okay, so this is basically all the things around the proposal. It will probably take you a couple of weeks, a month to develop the proposal, and then the proposal needs about 3 months to be reviewed. First it's reviewed at the local RDC, then it goes to DC. Depending on what kind of data you're using, it goes also to other administration tools. So if you have sensitive health data, I think there's also other bodies involved that get a look at the PPS. So that is something to keep in mind. So make sure that you have the benefits well defined, because if they're not well defined, the proposal will come back and there's no revise and resubmit. It just gets not approved, and then you have to make some changes and resubmit it, but then it goes again from the beginning of the process. So it will take some time. So try to get it right the first time and try to be in close contact with your proposal administrator here. Also, when you select your data sets and the years you're using, justify why you need those data sets for your proposal, because otherwise the administration turns around so like, we're not giving you all these data sets, and that also could lead to rejection. Okay, assuming everything went through, your proposal's approved, you can go in the lab and start doing your research. And then you'll forget actually about using the name RDC for this, because you'll get to know this as a salt mine, the closet that has no windows, and you'll just sit there on the data and you get to know them. And it's good to get your hands dirty. Okay. so the real power of the census data come into play because you can match several data sets. So you can match several census data sets. There's several identifiers, so you can match observation. You can also match them to outside data sets. So for example, you can bring in industry data, you can bring in CompuStat, say, and match CompuStat to census data and use information from both data sets. So that is really, really powerful. You can also, so that's especially important for people that live further away. You can have those data uploaded. So basically, you just fill in the form, email the data set in the form to the administrator, and they will upload it. You can also write code outside the lab and have the code uploaded too. So if you, let's say you want to do some work, some work on the data, then you just create some fake data on your own computer, you write some code, you run the code, you weed out the bugs, you do all that, and then you can have the code uploaded and then come here and do the research more effectively. So that is also something to keep in mind. So there's a whole lot of software packages that you can use, and nothing is a problem, I think, except Fortran code, because there's some compilation involved and their census looks a little bit more carefully what is actually in there.
They allow it. You have to be explicit in your proposal. So if you've got some specialized statistical routine or something that you've written, you have to be explicit in your proposal that you're going to be doing. But
let me jump in and say this document that Matthias prepared is really terrific. So we're going to post that on the website and we'll send it out by email so everybody will get it. And let's take a moment for a couple of questions while you're up.
Sure.
There's certainly more to this. There's a discussion of disclosure, an important topic that we're going to be covering, and we will cover that over the course of the day.
Okay.
Let's Simon, a shy person.
So I'm Simon Sheether. I'm head of the statistics department here. Have you found any gross errors in the data? And I imagine the answer is yes, because all databases have them. And then what do you do about trying to get them sorted out? So will the Census Bureau actually fess up to a mistake and change it? What do you do?
Yeah, so...
No. To all of the questions. There are no gross errors and they never fess up to them.
So I discovered one. Maybe that's why my papers get rejected. No, I mean it's happened. I mean, this is if you think about the amount of data census collects. I mean, the majority of the quote unquote errors lie in so-called imputed data. So some other researcher, sometimes census researchers, they work on some project, or some other researcher works on the project. They impute some data, and these data are usually made available on the entire research network. So that's a big benefit for the research community. But sometimes you want to know, so in my case, it turned out that in capital stock data that some other researcher imputed, there was just, some deflation was missing, and so there was implicit capital improvements in equipment that was not taken care of, and they just didn't aggregate up right. So what you do, or what I did, is you start emailing the census folks who are responsible for the data, and Sean is responsible for some of them, and they're always very happy when they get a researcher asking about one particular pernicious detail here. But then they will tell you what exactly is going on in the data, what was collected, how things were done. And this is where you can figure out, and usually it's something you have an aha moment and say, okay, so I made some mistake here because I assumed this was measuring X, but it's actually X tilde, and then you make some corrections in your model and it's set. Some other time, you make some improvements, and then it will be uploaded into the data. So that you will find whatever data set you're working with, you will find contacts in the Census Bureau that you can contact when you encounter problems like this, and then you can email them, and they're usually pretty responsive about this. And sometimes they're just data limitations problems, even the microdata that nobody can solve, but you have to know about them and make a decision. But I found I've been working with the census data now for 4 years. Well, yeah, 4 years. Good Lord. And they're usually very responsive, both in your local lab and both in Census, and replying to emails, because I also want to know if something is going on, what's wrong. Another thing, what I recommend is once a year there's a Census conference where people present research based on that use census data, and there are a lot of census researchers usually go there. So that's a great place to go, get into touch with them, talk with them about this problem, this little stuff, that little stuff. And that helps you to understand a lot more the data, and also helps to understand a little bit what you can help to improve the data if it's applicable.
Let me just say that question, and of course, as a statistician, you would agree with me that all data is crap, and some data is even worse than that. And Census won't say that the way I do, but essentially the list of benefits, the things that Census is looking for as potential benefits, are all the kinds of things that statisticians and econometricians worry about in terms of data quality. And so those your very simple question is the source, usually, of the benefits that Census is interested in, is having unpaid academic researchers going and helping them sort some of this stuff out for them.
Because your tips are so well organized, and they essentially amount to about half of the questions that we would expect people to ask something about. We're going to try to keep on the timetable and move now to Gail Boyd, and there'll be continuing opportunities for questions along the way. But Gail, if you'd like to talk about your research for a moment.
Sure.
And Bosch, I want to thank you for joining us. He needs to catch a flight. So we've got a bicycle for him out here.
So I alluded to this in my opening remarks, and I kind of came to the business data the same way that Theus did. My interest was a little different. I'm not a macro guy. In fact, I'm a very, very micro guy. I've been doing work in the area of industrial energy use and environmental impacts and productivity, and economists call it, unobservable heterogeneity. We get the microdata, we get to observe a little bit about it. Business people say, my plant's not the same as everybody else's. And, in the energy efficiency literature, there was a lot of engineering studies that talked about asked the question, why don't firms which have this profit motive adopt all of these wonderful energy efficient devices? And there's this notion of the energy efficiency gap. But with aggregate data, you can't really observe a gap because it's all been averaged together. You can only observe averages. And someone in the forest products industry said the average body temperature of a person with his head in the freezer and his feet in the oven don't tell you very much about that person. And what we find in the microdata is that a lot of industries, even what we think of as very narrowly defined industries, are a lot like that guy. So the averages tell you one thing, but the heterogeneity of the dispersion in the data tell you a very different story. And in the sort of energy efficiency literature, there wasn't good quantification. There was engineering studies of this dispersion, but I was interested in trying to measure that with sort of actual data. And so really, in a broad brush, that's what I've been doing. And when I say I'm a real micro guy, I'm talking about, I'll give you an example in some work I've recently been doing that's been funded by the EPA's Energy Star program. We started looking at the industry of frozen fruits and vegetables. Now that sounds like that's a real micro thing, right? In terms of frozen fruits. Someone from industry said, well, you can't include frozen fried potatoes in that. I said, in terms of energy use. He said, well, why? He says, because you don't fry the broccoli before you freeze it. And so we went and looked at the data, and lo and behold, if you looked at below the 6-digit NAICS code, which is frozen fruits and vegetables, and you looked at the 10-digit product code for a couple different types of frozen fried potatoes, lo and behold, the energy intensity was about double of the rest of the industry. So that's a drill down at a level which probably most people aren't interested in at all, except for me and a few people in that industry. But it gives you an example of the kinds of drill down that you can do if you have a reason to be thinking about it at that level. And I think that's one of the things that has driven, and in some of the other work that I've been doing, even when we look at 6-digit NAICS codes, which most people think of as a very, very detailed industry, I'm also looking at 10-digit product codes, looking at how the mix of different products, say, in the paper industry or the dairy industry influences their energy use. So this is so I'm not looking at huge data sets with lots of observations, but I'm really sort of, there's a mixed metaphor with the food industry, but I'm trying to figure out how thin to slice the salami, or maybe to slice the French fries, I don't know. So that said, I'll echo again, a lot of the things that I've been able to pull out that were useful to me really came out from reading the data forms and really looking closely at the kinds of information that was being asked by the Census Bureau. Because that told me, even before I walked into the lab, what information should be there. And you can get these forms, you can get these surveys. And literally, me and my RAs live in the lab with copies of those data forms so that we can know what variables should be there. So I'll underscore that again. Now, when I wrote the proposal 5 years ago, I didn't say in the proposal, I'm interested in studying the French fry industry. The research question was really a much broader. In fact, I think I encourage you to think, we've heard examples of people who wrote their thesis. Think broader than that when you write your proposal. You're proposing an agenda of research. For senior faculty in the audience, you want to think about that proposal being able to encompass a graduate school or a graduate student 2 years from now who hasn't even walked into your office yet, who says, Charlie, I'm really interested in the stuff you've been teaching in the class, and I want to do a thesis on it. I encourage senior faculty in particular to write their proposal describing a broad agenda of research. A body of questions that hangs together, that are important questions in your particular field, and that can be informed by the various data sets that that you can get information from this one and this one and this one. And in the same way that, Matthias was talking about, think about not the paper you're going to write, but the next couple of papers that you would like to write. And that's how you approach writing that proposal. I've already sort of said something about, what are the benefits are all the things that good research do with the data. And there really is, in writing this proposal, we're used to thinking about our research, and we're sort of not usually that good about thinking about what we're actually going to do when we sit down with the data. And the one nice thing about the census proposal is it forces us through that process a little bit. And it will force you through it because it's the only way you can get an approval, is to be pretty explicit about how you're going to link up data sets and how you're going to do QA. I'll give you an example of one of the benefits that was proposed for my project. It turns out I had lots of contacts within industries and with some trade associations, and trade associations sometimes collect data, confidential data, from their members. I said that I'm going to take that, I'm going to get that data, I'm going to match it to the census data, and then I can do a comparison. I can't say which one of the data sets is right, but I can say when they agree and when they disagree and what patterns there are for that. And I'll give you an example. I was looking at the cement industry. The Portland Cement Association had data. They collect very, very detailed data on energy use and also on labor. I was able to match it by the name and address and company name from the two different files. That's not a fun process, by the way, but you can do it. And then we found that for a variety of energy that's sort of the normal purchased energy, coal, natural gas, oil, the census and the PCA data agreed a lot. Where they didn't match up was on waste-derived fuels. Turns out the cement industry burns just about anything that will burn as a fuel, including old tires, garbage, medical waste, sewage sludge. I mean, they'll burn anything that has a BTU content. But quite unsurprisingly, the census data is accounting of that type of energy, and the PCA's data didn't line up. Now, I'm not going to try to say who was doing a better job of it, but we can report where there's very good agreement, where we have basically a very high confidence of in the way the data is collected and reported from the Census Bureau, and other areas where we did not. So that was an example of a benefit which I proposed. And again, it's sort of that, I was interested in studying dispersion and energy productivity, but if you're going to do that, you'd like to have a good idea of whether or not you've got all the data that you need and how good a quality it is. Again, it's that thesis appendix sort of argument. Census, was interested in that as a benefit, and we need to think about that. I'll mention just as so for those of you who are in here and are interested in health research, I guess we're going to talk about that this afternoon. All this discussion about census benefits doesn't apply to using the NCHS data. It's a much simpler and more transparent process. Sorry, Sean. But it is. And I use the census data. It's been worth it to me. I mean, I've sort of made that case before. I've gotten quite a bit of grant money over the years because I could do things and ask questions and get answers that other people couldn't. And so you want to think about payback. You can think about it in terms of your thesis and your job. You can think about it in terms of future graduate students that you're going to be able to graduate. The other part of that is that writing this stuff into grants and telling a funder that I've got a proposal, not a proposal, I've got permission from the Census Bureau to use data that none of these other people do. Charlie's nodding. It helps when you start writing those grants. Now, it's going to get harder, guys, because when I started doing this, there were only, when I first started doing this, there was only one RDC in census headquarters. We're now coming up on 13, and the number is growing. So this is where social science is headed. But being the first person to plow that new furrow in a data set that nobody's touched is hard. Be careful what you wish for, but may have an even bigger payoff. So, that's something else that we all sort of deal with as academics. I think I'll just leave it at that and open it up or move on. Right.
You were up a while ago. Did you want to?
Okay. About the second part.
Douglas Shaw, I'm economist here at A&M. Is there a central website or something where you can look at projects that currently exist so you can make sure you're not, like if you're chasing something and you find out that 5 people are already chasing that, you're wasting your time maybe, or would it be that when you try to get the proposal approved, they know that somebody else is already...
So yes and no.
Okay.
And I'll say that. So, and we pull one up on you right now, except the Center for Economic Studies is overhauling their main website, the main portal.
So we've got it. We've downloaded it.
But there are annual reports. Every paper has to produce, it's a requirement that you produce a working paper that goes into the CES archives. That is a gold mine to see what other people have been able to do. And of course, the typical academician and student thinks, how can I one-up them? So you can see, and you can also see areas where really people haven't touched at all. So we've got a group at Chapel Hill that's going to be looking at in the census of services. Census actually has forms they send out to universities. Did you know that? I hadn't really been aware of it. We sat down with that census form, and this research group was interested in intellectual property and a bunch of other things in terms of what our universities do and contribute to productivity. This is a goldmine to them. Nobody in the Census RDC network has touched this particular data set and done the kinds of things they're proposing. So
let me one of the roles where we can help is our assistants at the center have downloaded the materials. So we've cataloged the individual projects that are in the annual reports, which is not all projects, but it's the ones where the reports have been completed and distributed. Those are in a database, and they're extracted into a PDF that's searchable. So you could search on keywords in the titles and so forth. In addition, if you send us an email and say, I'm interested in this kind of a project. I don't want to reinvent the wheel if somebody's already done it. We can scout around. We've got a student now who's compiling all of the working papers, which is a different animal from these reports. And when that database comes together, that'll be searchable. So.
And when I said yes and no, there are lots of things that are publicly available. And actually, once you make the first hurdle and say, yeah, I want to chase this, your administrator, when you have one here, who's a census employee, has access to additional things that are not public. And so they can actually search existing projects and give you information on, well, yes, this is not a completed project, but so-and-so at Baruch or somebody up in Chicago is doing this. And it may even be that, they can sort of line you up with them and you can discuss collaboration or at least have some idea of sort of what different research groups are doing.
Department of Sociology here at Texas A&M. It seems to me that one of the key benefits of the data center is linking different data sets. And several people have commented on the complexity of this process, at least in some cases. I was just wondering if the Census data or the Census Bureau provides sort of examples of how people have linked data in the past, maybe with regard to your research. I mean, well, I guess you don't look at the firm level, but for example, if someone wanted to examine firm level data and EPA data and link those two, has this been done? Are there examples of other kinds of data sets where people have linked to sort of shortcut that process for researchers?
So there are some links that have been so well vetted and established, like firm level, the CompuStat is now just a bridge file you can access at this, in the RDC. I've actually done some linking to the EPA data. It's been on a piecemeal basis. I've written a couple different papers using different, EPA data sets, and that's actually down at the plant level. It hasn't been done, that particular example hasn't been done in any kind of comprehensive and replicable form, and so that's actually a possible source of benefit to the Census Bureau, that a particular project might look at those kinds of things. Again, I'll say, as to a good way to find out what's been done, you want to narrow your scope of, you don't want to know everything that's been done. You want to know what's been done that's sort of close to what you do. Looking at the CES working papers will give you a pretty good handle not only of what has been done, but a lot of those working papers will be pretty explicit about how they linked the data. It won't, it has its limits in terms of it can't describe certain confidential facts of it, but the process that has been used is often part of the working paper. In fact, we all encourage researchers when they submit working papers to be a little bit more detailed about those kinds of things. Obviously, when it gets to a major journal, they tell you, get rid of that stuff. But that is the kind of stuff that's in the working paper archives.
I'm going to jump in here for a second. In the handout, one of the pages is a one-page summary of a proposal development grant that we're announcing today. And for anyone in the audience who's thinking about some of the issues that are coming up, where it's going to take some legwork, really, to move toward a full-blown proposal, there's going to be an opportunity to request some support. And I won't review the entire document, but there's a one-page version in the handout, a slightly more detailed two-page version that's posted on the web.
Mark, can I?
Please?
Can I apply?
Actually, we don't rule it out, but the deck would be stacked against you.
I'm just saying, you're making us look bad. We don't give out money to help people. We do help people write proposals.
Well, you're doing, for God's sake. No,
trying.
It's
all of us.
It's during our startup phase that we're doing this. This is not a forever thing. I hope it would be nice if it turned into forever. But for right now, we're trying to jumpstart research where there's not yet an established base of researchers here. This is a big investment by Texas A&M and the other consortium universities. Everybody wants it to succeed, and many individual researchers want it to succeed, but they're on the bubble sometimes about whether or not they want to take the plunge themselves. So This program it's a small grant program, so you're not going to go to France for 6 months with a postdoc or something and work on a proposal. But for example, if hiring a student worker or a graduate assistant for a few weeks in the summer to help with the drill down into all of these census reports and the working papers to find out what's out there and so forth. If you need to travel to meet with somebody who's active in the field using these data, pick their brain about how it works and so forth, or maybe even collaborate. Those are some options. And I won't take up any more time. It's here in the handout, posted, and there's some timelines and things mentioned. So I think we have time for one more question in this segment before we move on.
Sorry, can I quickly add one thing about matching data and following up what other people have been doing? So very often you'll find that you may have different research projects, but you'll need probably the same procedures. What you can do is you can share code across projects. So if you use one certain data set, another project uses the same data set, and under your both PPS, you can justify using the same code. That code can be transferred from one project to another project. And you don't have to be in that project. You can file a request, and then you get the code. You can even get if the code is, let's say, used to create some bridge file, you can sometimes even get original data or imputed data moved across, as long as they're covered under both proposals and both PPSs. So that's something to look out for, that if somebody has gone through the pain, maybe you can trade.
And I'll say that the RDC network that is emerging now is much more than some sites that are all hooked up to the same computer back at Census headquarters. I would say the RDC Research Community Network is a growing one, and I'd say my experience has been that colleagues that are doing research in similar areas are very generous about sharing their ideas. Like you said, allowing you to pick their brain about how they did stuff, warning you away from, some of the black holes that they themselves have fallen into. So that is a resource that, that Texas will now be part of, and I would encourage people to plug into that. Don't feel shy to contact folks who are doing research in the RDCs. They don't all talk quite as much as I do, but they talk.
Well, let's move along now.